This is a point block. It's an older HDB. It only has about 44 years left. Quite a spacious unit. It has about 1,005 square foot. What we did in the space is every wall that we could hack, we kind of took down. We wanted a kind of like an open space flow into the unit itself. I think that created a little bit of a problem because we have pillars that we needed to work into the design. Taking all these requirements into the design gave a little bit of a challenge in how we did the actual layout. Hi, I'm Aryan. I'm the principal designer for this house. The design brief from the client for this house was to keep a monochrome palette, so work with the black and whites, and Chinoiserie influenced design aesthetic, and then punches of color with some of the wallpaper elements, bring in antique Chinese pieces, and some of the existing furniture and art pieces that the client already had. So from a collaboration point of view, the homeowner had a very strong aesthetic vision for the place. So I think what I contributed was more on all the architectural details, all the space planning elements, working around some of the problems that we had, like the lower beams, the ceilings, etc. So it was a very good combination of working together with like an aesthetically driven view. And then for me, also bringing in some of the elements that we normally bring to a design. Even before we started designing this space, I was referencing a trip I did to Hanoi. I stayed in a Chinoiserie hotel, and the aesthetic really was something that stayed with me. And this was actually the perfect opportunity to kind of bring some of that Indochine vibe into the overall aesthetic. So especially because the Indochine style was kind of introduced in France, like mid-1700s, was actually in the Trianon where they first implemented these Chinoiserie details. So then referencing this French colonial vibe that you see in Hanoi and in Vietnam in general, kind of really tied the whole scheme together. So while the referencing for most of the antique pieces are Chinese, I still wanted to bring a little bit of that French colonial and then pair it with mid-century pieces as well. So I think you just don't go too one way with the design. It's also quite nice if the house looks a little bit more in a way that it's been like styled over the years. Once you enter the front door, you'll be greeted by the foyer, which was actually the recess area that the homeowner purchased. That gave us the opportunity to create a larger entrance area. My idea was to make it a bit more of a gloomy, darker space that controls the light. So to further enhance the darker experience in the foyer, what we picked was still a tropical wallpaper, but the base colors are quite dark. We kind of like painted the ceilings in a dark color. The flooring, we worked with this tessellated floor where it's kind of different patterns, but the base is still like a more black than white. So it kind of like enhances this whole more darker, moody experience in the foyer. And then when you turn the corner, it kind of like opens up the entire space. So you have that very contrasting experience of something that's kind of dark and enveloping to something that's bright and airy and open. And I kind of like that experience to play with people's emotions once they come through the door. So from a space planning point of view, the idea was to keep the living room in different kind of zones. So we wanted to have like a living room conversation area, a dining area, a media area. Initially, we had the bedroom in one of the original locations, but once we kind of started hacking the walls down, it kind of made a lot more sense to tuck the bedroom and the dressing room together in one space. So the previous dining area that had a bit of a balcony, we kind of annexed that together with the dressing room. So we had like 3 compartments of the unit that kind of opened up and had that unobstructed view. So when we had these different zones, I kind of like then amplified that look with the patterns on the floor itself. So we have all these different tile patterns that flow through the space as well. So all these rectangular spaces that kind of mimic the ceilings as well. So what we did eventually is, it is an open space, but we really zoned it in how we did the floor placements, how we did the ceiling placements as well. So eventually what happened is you have this whole open space, but I think it's very much focused per area with a design and an architectural detail. So when we started planning for the apartment, we already looked at furniture as well. So initially the living room space was supposed to be in this area, which is now like a conversation area. So when we picked the sofas, etc., it was all scaled for this space. Then in the process of hacking, actually what happened was that we moved like a media room further down. That gave the opportunity to kind of like have like two opposing design elements that are kind of pulling this room together. So all the HDBs normally have these beams and then the walls that kind of like inset. So what we did is to make these niches into the wall itself that we lined with wallpaper, and the two of them are kind of like opposite each other. So those two elements that we then lined with wallpaper is actually tying the room back together again. So we kept referencing these curved corners, but to free up the space a bit more, what we did is then use the metal bars that are curved into the pillar sections, because that gives you a more clear view into the space. So one of the requirements was to have an entertaining space. So for the dining, what we planned was to do a long banquet seating, because this kind of gives you the opportunity to have like a bigger group. The banquet seating also offers a bit more extra storage. So what I then planned was the height of the base of the banquet seating, to pack that as the height that we then used throughout the entire apartment as the wainscoting height as well. So it's like a one clean line that swoops through the entire space. Of course, we got a slightly bigger extendable table in, then we paired it with dining chairs that are a bit more mid-century. And then as a statement piece over the table itself, we found this chandelier. It's actually like lotus flowers, but it's made out of copper wires. Quite a contemporary look, but it still references something that's quite Asian. But because it's kind of open and airy, I think it works very well in the space, since the ceilings are a little bit lower. So you can do a dramatic light piece, but if you're keeping it a bit more open and airy, it doesn't dominate the space so much. So when planning the furniture for the space, very few existing pieces came, but there were a few pieces that we had to integrate because they were kind of special to the homeowner as well. What we did was look at the pieces that were existing there, and then what are the new pieces that we needed to purchase. So first what we did is start look at all the more intricate pieces. So we kind of ended up with this tea bench that was quite a nice piece that was kind of like an older Chinese antique that we kind of brought in. And then we paired it with some of the Chinese reproduction pieces. So for the TV console, the shoe cabinet, etc., we kind of picked these pieces that still had that aesthetic. So in the heart of the house is where we have the dry kitchen. It's kind of like the darkest space in the place. So I also wanted to embrace that with a slightly more darker palette as well. So all the carpentry that we did is kind of like a darker hue. We picked a very striking countertop marble that we kind of wanted to have as a centerpiece. And around that we designed the island. Thought of doing a bit more of a contemporary approach to a turned leg. So I overscaled the design of the legs, had them custom made, and then integrated into the carpentry just to make a bit more of a statement, but also to make it a bit more interesting visually. And then in the dry kitchen, we needed a lot more storage. The recessed panels are actually storage, so when you press them, you have extra drawer storage there. Since the dry kitchen is in the darker space of the apartment, I thought of lining the back wall with a mirror. So instead of using a normal mirror, we use this antique mirror where the mercury is a bit more affected, and the patina gives like a softer, old world charm to the space. Since the homeowner really loves to entertain and cook, the kitchen itself had to be expanded out a little bit. So what we did is push the kitchen forward into the living space a bit more. That gave us the opportunity to do a much larger countertop, and then we could center it around a big farmhouse sink. I don't like a lot of carpentry, so what we did is we kind of kept a very symmetrical base, and even some of the doors that we put in still have like drawer fronts, so that the whole bottom cabinets have a very symmetrical look. We kept the upper cabinet only on one side of the kitchen itself, so that freed up the back wall. So I wanted to do this statement chimney hood because it's not an open kitchen, but because the entrance is open into the space itself, so that becomes like a focal point from the living room. Opposite, we needed a few entrances. There's like a laundry space, etc., and we have a little bit of storage. So instead of having a lot of doors that are like entry doors into the laundry space, what I did is basically mask them all with carpentry. When you look into the kitchen itself, you have one door that's the powder room, but then the tall units, not all of them are cabinets, but it just gives that very symmetrical look into the space. Since this is a bachelor apartment, the common bathroom could become a powder room, which is something that you can take a real bold design statement. So I proposed to do it in a very black and gold aesthetic. The homeowner wasn't fully on board with it. Took a little bit of convincing, but I always feel like the smaller the space, the bolder you work on like the patterns and the colors. So once I got him on board to go really dark and black and gold, we then embraced that whole look. So we got this antique cabinet that we used as a vanity, and then we added like a bamboo mirror, kind of really amped up on all the black and gold aesthetics, which is a very Chinese reference as well. So when we reoriented the master bedroom, one of the problems that we kind of faced is where's the entrance door going to be? I didn't want to necessarily give up the storage space from the dry kitchen, and the bed orientation was kind of like where it had to be. So that only gave me access from the entertainment room area. To have like another door there, I just felt make the whole room a lot more heavier and drives the eye away from the arch that we did in the niche. So what I did was a concealed door with a kind of like a discrete push plate. When you look into the space, it kind of like flushes the door. It's like a jib door that kind of like hides. And then when you open the space itself, it's kind of like a compact bedroom. So the initial plan for the master bedroom was actually to kind of mimic what we had in the living room with like wallpaper panels that kind of created a headboard. And then we were shopping for the furniture pieces, and then we saw these stained glass doors, and we looked at each other and it's like, that would be like awesome for the headboard. So we kind of deviated from what was our original plan. Also because we moved the bedroom to a slightly smaller place, so it just snugly fit a bed. And then even finding the side tables was a little bit tricky because you didn't have that much space. Instead of doing something like with the wallpaper and a bit more designed, actually those glass panels, I lined the wall behind it with mirror, put like lights behind it so that the wall doesn't look so dead. And then the original master bedroom became a dressing room. From the beginning, we always said, okay, we're not doing a lot of built-in carpentry, so let's look at off-the-rack pieces, integrate a little bit of artwork as well. So there are new cabinets that are made. They fit the space quite well. So working with existing pieces of furniture, like the wardrobes, etc., just adds so much more character into the space. As a dressing room, that kind of came together quite nicely. And then there's a separation between the two. What we did is we found these antique doors. They were basically swing doors. We combined them together to become like a pocket door. So it adds a bit of a punch of color into the space, a bit more visual interest, especially when it comes to the architectural detail. So things like doors and etc. gets a lot more emphasis. The original bathrooms were quite tight, a lot of pipes, like older HDBs always tend to be like that. So what we did was push the wall out and reorient where the vanity was gonna be. I think very early on we saw this antique cabinet for that space. So when we rebuilt the walls out, we knew the size we wanted to fit that cabinet. So it kind of like fits, like it's custom made for the space, but it's actually an off-the-rack piece that we did. Gave us a little bit of extra space to add some hidden storage, which is kind of useful. We work with 3 or 4 different types of tiles. So we have like a scallop tile at the vanity side, and then we have a floor tile, a book match marble tile into the shower stall itself. So to kind of quiet all these different elements, I use this fiberglass panel at the main wall, so behind the WC and etc. A lot of planning and a lot of detailing goes into a space. Hopefully when you look into the room, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of elements going on. And I think that's the trademark of a good design, is that it doesn't look too overworked. It just looks like naturally all falls into place. But there's actually a lot of planning that goes ahead. Actually, the project itself was a lot of fun. Of course, each project you will have aspirations. I think like a homeowner have aspirations, and as a designer you have aspirations. I think in the end it's not about each party pushing their own aesthetics forward. It's always about coming together at a middle ground. And I think eventually that's, it's a good showcase here where you just have like a lot of elements that I normally would put into a project, something that really is the homeowner's aesthetic, and that makes a project fun.
Two, three, and action. Okay, tiptoe out.